Hello everyone, welcome to this Aztlander presentation. The pictographs of Texas's lower Pecos River, 2200 BCE to 400 CE, narratives, toponyms, and connections to Mesoamerica, with Carolyn E. Tate, Professor Emerita of Pre-Columbian Art History at Texas Tech University. Take it away, Carolyn.
Well, hi everybody. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I appreciate it, and especially you Aztec specialists, Cecilia and others. I'm going to be interested. This is pretty crazy, so that's kind of normal for me, I guess. So it'll be good to get your feedback. And also, before I start, especially because it's Indigenous Peoples Day, I want to acknowledge that the beautiful land where I am right now, which is the city of Bend in Oregon, was the original homelands of the Wascue and Tanana peoples. These groups ceded this land to the U.S. government in the Treaty of Middle Oregon in 1855, while retaining regular and customary hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. As a result of this treaty, the Warm Springs Indian Reservation was created, which is up the road. Beginning in 1897, groups of Paiute people were placed on the reservation, sometimes forcibly. And through this region, along the Deschutes River, which is our beautiful river here, the Klamath people traveled to the Great Celilo Falls trading area. And we acknowledge and thank these people who were, of course, the original stewards of this land. Okay, we got to figure out how to change the slides. Here we go. In 2021, selected rock art sites of the lower Pecos Canyonlands in South Texas were collectively designated a National Historic Landmark. Getting to see these pictographs is not always easy. Some sites, like Seminole Canyon State Park, are open to the public. Others can be visited in organized groups, like the site I've got a picture from here, White Shaman. And while I'm thinking about it, I don't know where to tell you to put your picture gallery, because I didn't think about that when I put text in the slides. It should be pretty much everywhere. So you might want to fiddle with that, because I kind of took up the whole screen with the slides. Okay, so this is White Shaman, and it's on private land, but you can visit it in an organized group. This is a half of the Rattlesnake Canyon panel, a watercolor rendering of it, the one that Texas Tech now owns. This is Texas Tech isn't private exactly, but it's restricted access, and it's accessible only by making personal arrangements, which is really sad because this is one of the major and earliest sites. So it's hard to see these Pecos River pictographs. Despite decades of academic and popular publication and the efforts of two organizations, Shumla Archaeological Research and Educational Center and the Whitty Museum of San Antonio, this national treasure of early paintings is little known to most Americans. Furthermore, Pecos River style pictographs, which have been radiocarbon dated to span from approximately 2200 BC to AD 400, are rarely dealt with by people studying the pre-contact American Southwest or by Mesoamericanists. That's why I'm delighted that you are here tonight. Although I am by no means an expert on Lower Pecos pictographs, I do have a bit of knowledge about Mesoamerica. And as you heard, I think it's quite possible that various Mesoamerican groups traveled to or knew of the hidden, water-filled, ecologically diverse region, which is penetrated with many rock shelters that we call the Lower Pecos Canyonlands. Many scholars have referred to people moving around the region north of the Rio Lerma in Mexico up to southern Utah. Sometimes referred to generally as Chichimecs, these were actually many groups who did not speak the same language and who had varying interactions with the agriculturalists and state builders of Mesoamerica. We also know that trade between Mesoamerican groups and people of the American Southwest is clearly documented by the Classic period. As you can kind of see here, I have a cool pointer thingy. This line, the Casas Grandes Central Mexico line, we know about that trade. A lot of people know about that. Colors are kind of hard to see here, but that's certainly a Classic period trade route between Central Mexico and the American Southwest, or at least Northwest Mexico. And even there's some possibility that trade routes existed in the formative period. In the many rock shelters of the lower Pecos Canyon lands, travelers from Mesoamerica would have encountered projectile points and fiber objects, including sandals and bags, from the very early American humans, and pictographs depicting what we might call spirit beings. They may have found peyote, like these button-like peyote effigies found in lower Pecos archaeological deposits. 6 millennia ago, someone ground up peyote buttons, mixed that with other plants, and made these little things, which look like peyote buttons. They still retain a significant mescaline content. Tonight, I'll first introduce you to the lower Pecos Canyonlands as a region, then to one of the several major rock art styles found there called Pecos River style of pictographs, which are the most numerous and probably the oldest pictographs in the region. After that, I'll get into the main body of the presentation, which has 3 major proposals. The first one is that way back in 2200 BC, prior to the advent of much iconography or writing in Mesoamerica, people gathering in the lower Pecos devised, among other communicative signs, a toponym or place sign. Others have noted this sign and called it a hole in the universe motif, or more neutrally, a crenellated arch. And for brevity's sake tonight, I'm calling it that sort of worn word, portal. To help you understand the role of toponyms in Central Mexican pictography, we'll have a brief overview. Pretty brief. My second proposal, oops, no Pecos. Get on the right track here. There we go. My second proposal is that Mesoamericans in general and Southern Uto-Aztecan speakers, especially Nahuatl speakers in particular, may have journeyed to the lower Pecos, seen the pictographs and other cultural remains, and conceived of the Canyonlands as a place of origins. Whether or not it actually was a homeland for the Chichimec, Teo-Chichimec, Aztec, or other people is up in the air and beyond the scope of this talk. I'm talking about how the post-classic Nahua may have thought when they came to the lower Pecos and how they depicted those visual memories. Which leads me to the third proposal. Science shows that when we notice a specific object within a natural setting, this juxtaposition helps us form a long-term visual memory. And I'm thinking that the shape of places, their geomorphology, plays an important role in how Mesoamericans chose places for settlement. I'll summarize some studies by Mesoamericanists on the Rincon, a cove near a mountain, through which streams flow as a primordial place of origin. I'll supplement that with a little neuroscientific information on shapes and memory. And ultimately, I'm suggesting that the image-filled canyons of the lower Pecos were known to at least some Mesoamerican peoples over several millennia and played an important role in Nahua concepts of and representations of Chico-Moztoc, their place of emergence. And all you Nahuatl specialists, I hear you rolling your eyes. The lower Pecos Canyonlands is a liminal place. Approaching from the north, the steep-sided canyons are hidden as they drop down below the visible terrain. The Pecos and Devils Rivers penetrate the Stockton and Edwards plateaus in central Texas, gouging the canyons that grow deeper as the river channels empty into the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. When rainstorms cross the plateaus, torrents of water shoot over the cliffs. This hydraulic action has carved innumerable rock shelters along canyon walls. Where these major and smaller seasonal rivers merge into the Rio Grande, they have created a series of deeply undulating or serpentine bends, and I'm going to use my cool pointer to just point this out on this sketch map. Deep bends. This series of deep bends in the Rio Grande arcs northeastward as the river wraps around a great upthrust, the Serranías de los Burros in Coahuila, which are an outlier of the Sierra Madre Oriental, and you'll see where that is in the next slide. It's impossible to find a slide that covers both sides of the Rio Grande and shows topography, or at least I have not succeeded. Like I had to piece these two maps together. It sort of reminds me of like why these people want a border wall and etc. Anyhow, so it kind of doesn't work perfectly, but this dotted line surrounds the distribution of Pecos River style pictographs in Coahuila, Mexico. And here's this mountain I'm talking about, the Serranías. And then here's the Rio Grande, kind of approximated by this crummy line on my PowerPoint, and then you can kind of see the other canyons and plateaus up above. So the Burros, these mountains, rise to about 6,000 feet. And if you were coming in from the south, this would certainly present a formidable barrier. I'm sorry, I clicked in advance. So to enter the canyonlands, one would have to go around the mountains or find the passes that thread through the rugged terrain. Once they got beyond the mountains, here, a traveler would encounter a semi-arid, mostly flat basin watered by springs that flow northward from the slopes of the Burros to the Rio Grande. Near the springs, which they would have certainly approached for water, they would have found pictographs in dry rock shelters. On the north side of the Rio Grande, the cliffs of the canyonlands rise, and in their river-carved rock shelters are hundreds of pictographic tableaus. The region's biology is as unusual as its terrain. 3 different biotic regions, the Tamaulipan brushlands, the Edwards Plateau, and the Trans-Pecos Chihuahua Desert, overlap in the lower Pecos Canyonlands. Species from each region found that the springs, seeps, and runoffs from rain offered conditions conducive to their success, and this led to an astonishing degree of biological diversity, according to everyone who's studied the lower Pecos. As we can see then, the lower Pecos Canyonlands constitute a peripheral and relatively hidden, semi-arid wonderland of flowing waters. Amidst steep curving cliffs containing many rock shelters exists an impressive variety of flora and fauna, including aquatic creatures. In the 10,000 years that humans have frequented the region, their use of the canyonlands has fluctuated with the climate. When increased moisture allowed the grasslands of the central United States to extend southward toward the Rio Grande River, Paleo-Indians drove bison over the cliffs and butchered them. Late Paleo-Indian and early Archaic bands used the canyons from about 8,000 BC and lived in the rock shelters beginning around 7,500 or 7,000 BC. So here's a chronology. Different groups of humans came and went for thousands of years until the Middle Archaic. Around 2400 BC, when warm, dry conditions on the plains sent people to the relative oases of the canyonlands and the rivers. Solvig Turpin thought that as climate refugees, people who had been hunter, fisher, gatherers came to the canyons in increasingly large macrobands They developed leadership structure to manage conflict resolution and decision-making. As they became quasi-sedentary, they developed hierarchical, social, and religious structures, and these were expressed in the pictographs. Most of the pictographs date from the San Felipe interval up here in the Canyonlands, and here are the dates, 2100 to about 1200 BC. On the Texas side of the border, over 320 rock shelters with Pecos River style pictographs have been documented. Over 35 PRS, it's a lot to say, so I might call Pecos River style PRS. About 35 PRS pictograph sites have been found among the Serranias in Mexico. Together, these form one of the most extensive corpuses of pictographs. Of course, everybody I hope knows pictographs are painted rock art, not carved, surviving in North America. There are complex painted compositions ranging in size from a few figures in a small alcove to rock panels measuring over 100 feet in width and 30 feet in height, populated with hundreds of figures. Across hundreds of rock shelters and over 2,000 years, artists worked in a relatively consistent mode of representation, which we call the Pecos River style. Here we see anthropomorphs in the blue ovals, quadrupeds, enigmatic beings, ritual objects, including the atlatl, which is portrayed quite frequently, and, assorted geometric things, forms. Those are kind of the major categories of imagery. Probably the imagery gave form to the worldviews that the hunter-gatherers brought to or developed in the Canyonlands. They make visible the spiritual entities, natural phenomenon, and human dynamics, and how they related to the Canyonlands. Sociologist Margaret Greco, a Native American herself, observed that the anthropomorphs seem to be inspired by the patterns made when water seeps down the sides of the rock shelters. She sees the pictographs as sentient living embodiments of environmental features rooted in the unique locality of landscape. And that's a quote. She writes that for Indigenous people, the features of the natural world may contain the embodiment and metamorphosis of animate entities. And she thinks Euro-American categorizations and descriptions fail to recognize the inherently vital character of the pictographs. I certainly do not disagree. I agree, but I hope we can layer a sense of animate, interconnected biosphere with our European type analysis, because we may need some help tonight to see these forms. Let's start with anthropomorphs. All PRS anthropomorphs are composed of simple elongated shapes that make no effort to represent anatomy accurately. Their consistently frontal torsos are usually slightly broader at the top, where outstretched stick-like arms were attached, and taper toward the bottom. Simple linear legs hang below the elongated torso, and you can see here some profile kind of feet. Heads may be frontal, every once in a while profile. They're often small relative to the torso and sometimes are absent. And if there are any heads, they mostly lack facial features. Despite these similarities, anthropomorphic figures are far from identical, as you can see here. The colors and patterns that decorate the interiors of the torsos differ. The shapes and size and everything, they're not all the same. Animal forms often appear too, and most quadrupeds are shown in profile. I think here you can see some little deer with arrows in them. Their stick-like legs sprang from simply shaped bodies to which are attached identifying elements such as horns or long tails. Ritual objects and tools are also portrayed with simple lines. And to me, it's interesting that there's generally no ground line.
No color.
Sorry. I guess I better turn that off. So the imagery is not tied to an ordered earthly plane. The Pecos River style is most closely related stylistically with the Barrier Canyon pictographs in Utah, which you see here. Abstract style petroglyphs of the Chihuahua Desert and archaic pictographs in Baja California. In other words, there's rock art as old as or nearly as old as the Pecos River style in Utah, Chihuahua, and Baja California. And of those three, some are petroglyphs, carvings, or relief carvings. And of those three, the pictographs of Barrier Canyon style, which you see here, are the most similar. Dates for Barrier Canyon style pictographs are still disputed. According to archaeologist Polly Schaafsma, they were probably made by archaic period hunter-gatherers who frequently situated the pictographs near springs and near mountains where food sources were more varied than in the desert plains. She thinks they were possibly northern Uto-Aztecan speakers who are known to have traveled through this area. So here's a comparison of Pecos River style on the right and Barrier Canyon on the left. And maybe I didn't pick the best Pecos River style, but the Pecos River style is just generally more elongated and looks slightly less like space aliens. Until further scientific dating resolves the debate, Pecos River style pictographs are as early as or predate any major body of paintings elsewhere in Mesoamerica, in North America, including Mesoamerica. In fact, a team of scientists, some of them from Shimla, recently used plasma oxidation and accelerator mass spectrometry, the method developed to date the Pecos River style pictographs, to date the oxalate covering the pigments in cave paintings at Uto-Aztecan, an Olmec-related site in Guerrero, Mexico. They found that the well-known seated bird costume figure on the right is probably very early formative, around 1500 BC, which is earlier than previously thought, but as much as 600 years later than the earliest Pecos River style pictographs, but it does overlap in time. In his report on Uto-Aztecan back in the 1970s, archaeologist Dave Grove noted that the people of the Uto-Aztecan region then spoke Nahuatl, which of course is a southern Uto-Aztecan language. I'm mentioning these linguistic affiliations, Uto-Aztecan in Utah and also in Guerrero, because although we don't have any firm evidence about who made Pecos River style pictographs, Uto-Aztecan languages were spoken in the surrounding areas. Returning to the lower Pecos, because these basic forms like elongated torsos and principles such as a lack of ground line were so consistent at sites throughout the lower Pecos, it's reasonable to claim that at least to some extent they were conventionalized, by which I mean that in their choice of shape, color, interior patterning, accoutrements like feathers or rabbit ears, and position relative to other figures within a composition, painters made decisions that conveyed agreed upon meanings. This degree of intentionality in PRS pictographs is supported by archaeologist Carolyn Boyd's recent claim in her White Shaman book that the White Shaman panel, which measures about 26 feet wide and 13 feet high, and which you can see here, was conceived as a single composition. She founded Shimla, so I've mentioned Shimla a time or two. It's named after one of the cave sites here. So she has done, and continues to do digital microscopy at these sites. And at White Shaman, it has suggested that each of the 4 colors found in the mural was painted separately. And this is really cool. This is her work. First, 3 layers of black were applied, including dissociated dots and lines, as well as interior decoration of future figures. The 3 layers of black were painted across the shelter panel. Then the painter or painters applied red paint in 5 layers, really filling out a lot of the imagery. Yellow in 2 layers, and white in 2 layers. One of the major features of the white is this line that undulates across, and there's also some white scattered around in various places. In other words, Boyd rejects a typically held idea about rock art that individual figures or forms were painted on top of previously existing ones, at least at White Shaman. However, archaeologist James Burr Harrison McCrae proposes a different strategy for how artists chose what to represent in the pictographic panels. He finds that the anthropomorphs are juxtaposed with 19 distinct core motifs and/or 54 specific symbolic elements. These are thematic compositions such as an anthropomorph amid sinuous lines, which I'm showing you, equals, or a series of equals. In this case, these 5 black similar figures right here. A hole in the universe. I might have a slide of that. Let's see. Oh, that one. Yeah, the hole in the universe, or portal. These are 3 of McCrae's core motifs. 3 of his 19. He sees these core motifs as reflective of episodic ritual behavior and proposes that the anthropomorphs around which the variable elements cluster may have been spiritual and/or political leaders. There are other motifs such as associated apprentice and series of equals, and these express the variation in leadership scales within these complex hunter-gatherer groups who occupy the canyon lands in times of environmental stress. My point is that the PRS pictographs were probably not randomly conceived or drawn. Artists adhered to a system of image making. Several design units or motifs within that system seem to have been conventionalized symbols, although, we have to remember that they didn't have a font book, right? They're recognizably similar, but they're not identical, these conventionalized symbols, including the crenellated arch, or as I'm calling it, the portal, which is shown here. So far, I've introduced Lower Pecos River Canyonlands and the fact that hundreds of rock shelters contain significant pictographic compositions. We've seen some Pecos River style pictographs, and I've mentioned some of the scholars who document and interpret the Pecos River style images. And now we arrive at the first focus of this presentation, one motif, variously called Hole in the Universe, Crenellated Arch, and this simpler name, Portal. I think it's possible that Southern Uto-Aztecan speakers, perhaps the Nahua, saw or knew about the Lower Pecos and its pictographs, and adapted this portal motif for their own purposes. They may have even considered the Lower Pecos as an ancestral homeland. Several experts in the PRS, including the late Solveig Turpin and the living scholars Carolyn Boyd and James McCrae, recognize this conventionalized symbol I focus on today. It consists of an undulating line enhanced by dots, lines, or protrusions, which creates an arcing shape. Often there is a circular void at the apex of the arch, and in all cases there is an anthropomorphic figure, often with animal attributes, that seems to be in the process of passing through the arc or arch. In her 2003 book, Rock Art of the Lower Pecos, Carolyn Boyd saw the undulating line as a serpent, a symbol for the Earth's surface, and discussed a shamanic context for the PRS pictographs. From that viewpoint, the anthropomorphic figure passes through a portal for the purpose of contacting spirits or ancestors as helpers. Evidence for the serpent portal comes from Huichol and Yaqui traditions, in which the serpent serves as a gateway to the world below. In her 2016 monograph on the White Shaman site, which may date as late as the first centuries AD, Boyd gives it a neutral designation, crenellated arch, and draws further analogies with Huichol oral tradition, proposing that this crenellated arch corresponds to the Huichol Dawn Mountain, the birthplace of the sun and peyote. More generally, she considers the crenellated arch motif to refer to the prototypical primordial mountain, the location from which all life emerged. Now, back in 1994, Solveig Turpin called this motif a hole in the universe and associated it with supernatural flight from one cosmic realm to another. In recent work, James McCrae follows her interpretation. Like Mesoamericans and many Native American groups, I probably don't have to explain this to this audience, but the archaic artists of the Pecos River style seem to have had a worldview in which a celestial realm included the sky, with both daytime creatures and nighttime stars, the earth with its variable features and waters, and the underworld, which is also sometimes watery, all of which are inhabited by powerful beings. And I know also that there's been critique of this tri-level universe idea, but we're going with it for the moment. Caves and crevices in the terrain could be portals between realms, and beings, human and otherwise, could pass or fly through the portals. These three scholars agree that the motif represents a portal or passage between these existential realms. So for brevity, I'm calling it a portal. McCrae includes it, as I said, among his 19 core motifs. In his survey of 43 PRS sites, the portal was the most frequently occurring image, appearing 89 times. It also appears at many sites not included in McCrae's survey. For example, there are 3 portal motifs at Rattlesnake Canyon, a major site with very restricted access. So there are a lot of this, very common. Because the portal is a recurring, recognizable component of PRS art, but does not appear as a motif in known rock art at archaic period sites in northern Mexico or the southwestern United States, I propose that in addition to the possible meanings of earth or primordial mountain or portal, it's an early example of a toponymic sign, a conventionalized sign that refers to the overall character of the lower Pecos Canyonlands, its hidden canyons and rock shelters, the undulating rivers, and the mountains. So on this map, you can see the current courses of the Pecos River, which is here. It starts in New Mexico, the Devils River, the Rio Grande here, and this is the dam that was created in the lake that was created by the dam in 1968, destroying some of these sites. And also, while I'm at it, I'll point out, here's Rattlesnake Canyon, approximately. They won't ever really identify exactly where it is on a map for obvious reasons. White Shaman, Panther Cave, Cedar Springs, Mystic Shelter, and all these sites that are mentioned on this map are major sites, and all of them have portal motifs. So I also want to point out that the Rio Grande kind of arches northeastward as it wraps around the Serranias, which perhaps led to the use of the arcing shape of the toponymic sign. Nowhere else along the Rio Grande are the bends as deep as in this region, and the Pecos and Devils rivers also follow extreme switchbacks. In the polyvalent way that many symbols function, the arches' undulating shapes may refer to the 3 salient characteristics of the lower Pecos: a primordial mountain, perhaps to the burros, the undulating rivers, which supported the abundant life forms of the region, and the hidden caves and canyons. The anthropomorphic figure that passes through the arch emerges from the canyons and the rivers as either an ancestor or part of shamanic activity. What we're seeing in the development of a toponymic sign by 2200 BC may be a phase in the development of a semasiographic communication system. Semasiographic symbols communicate information directly to a viewer and do not depend on language. As discussed by art historian Elizabeth Boone, images in such a system visually evoke the referent. In this case, the referent is the hidden rincon of the lower Pecos region, its undulating arcs of canyons through which water explodes, creating a basin bordered by mountains and filled with a diversity of life forms which bore evidence of very ancient human use and occupation. And we'll return to the importance of the rincon in a later section. So I am not claiming that Pecos River style pictographs are writing, because most of the imagery is neither as consistent nor as fully developed as Central Mexican pictography. Instead, I merely suggest that the portal motif is a toponym. These, however, were among the earliest types of signs to emerge when pictorial writing systems did develop in Mesoamerica. So now I want to turn to the second topic, which is toponyms. According to Steve Houston, toponymic signs or place signs were among the first to appear in Mesoamerican pictorial writing and iconographic symbol systems, and they occurred among different cultures. So I want to look briefly at how toponyms were identified in Mesoamerican art and what kinds of places they referred to. In the late 1970s, several scholars recognized the presence of toponyms in Mesoamerican art and pictorial writing. Examining the murals of Teotihuacan, archaeologist Jorge Angulo suggested that the repeated motif of a scalloped arch enclosing an interior border of serrated shapes was a sign for mountain and served as part of a toponym. This image appeared in multiples along the lower portion of the walls in room 13 of Zone 5A, a building along the northwest side of the Avenue of the Dead. Other mountain-based toponyms are found in other buildings. Mary Elizabeth Smith's pioneering study of Mixtec place signs, or toponyms, the ones that survived date to the 15th and 16th century, clarified that they have two or three consistent parts. One is a geographic substantive, which is a sign referring to a feature such as a hill, irrigated plain, or river. These two toponyms refer to towns, so the stepped town sign is included. These general signs are modified by the addition of a qualifier, which could be a color, animal, ritual object, or other item that designates a specific feature. On the left, we see a mouth emitting sand, which names the town Anute, place of sand, and on the right, a red and white bundle, which is the name of that town. So this is a pretty brief overview, but there is more research on toponyms. But we can glean that toponyms may appear in multiples in a single composition, that similar toponymic signs may occur at different locations within a cultural zone, and that the emphasis on pictorial rather than phonetic elements in early signs made it more likely that speakers of different languages could understand them. And we see all these aspects in the Pecos River style portal motif. So then we might ask, what kinds of places have toponymic signs referred to? In this toponym from Teotihuacan, the scalloped arch referred to a mountain, and the five-pointed star within and beside the three mountain images named it as Star Mountain. Signs for Star Mountain occurred in several different locations at Teotihuacan. Christoph Helmke and Jesper Nielsen use the 17th century documentary evidence to suggest that the hill to which the sign refers lies about 6 kilometers north of the Moon Pyramid. And I don't know whether that arrow points to it or not, but it's there for effect. This Star Mountain mural is in a room in which another mural portrays a mythical event, the shooting of a celestial bird by blowgunners. And Helmke and Nielsen suggest that the 2 Star Mountain murals in this room indicate where the mythical event occurred, perhaps at Tepet, Star Mountain, Mexico's highest peak, now called Orizaba. Around 150 BC, Zapotecs developed toponymic signs to represent conquered places. Note that, like later Mixtec place signs, they employed geographic substantives, usually hill signs, and variable qualifiers to name the place. Also, they include a reflection of action, in this case, conquest, by the referent of a dangling head. And these appear on the conquest slabs of Monte Alban during period 2. By the post-classic, of course, toponymic signs help the Mixtec convey narratives of genealogy, conquest, and ritual in their pictorial histories. Here's an image. I've taken out some of the irrelevant parts. It's an image of the meeting of historical people, Lord Eight Deer and Lady Six Monkey, and her deceased partner, Three Lizard, with the supernatural Lady Nine Grass at this fabulous place of skulls, which is on the lower right. So let's see. Here we go. One mythic place the Aztecs referred to was, of course, Chicomostoc, a place of ancestral origins. Similarly, the PRS portal and the anthropomorph that passes through it refer to a place that exists, but was thought to possess supernatural qualities. It's a primordial place of ancestral or shamanic emergence. Something similar to the Pecos River style portal motif occurs in early Mesoamerican cultures, but the images are not so similar as to suggest direct borrowing, but I want to show you just a couple. On the left is a PRS portal motif at Mystic Shelter. We can see the undulating line of the earth surface and or river. In this case, the anthropomorph, who is associated with an atlatl and dart points, emerges through a black hole from what may be a watery underworld. The undulating arc seems to surround an alternate realm of smaller anthropomorphs surrounded by what are black and red dots. And on the right, I had to throw this in as this is my thing, is a drawing of a large stela from the Gulf Coast Olmec site of La Venta. It probably dates to the end of the Olmec era, maybe 500 to 400 BC. The frontal face on this stela is a stylized image of the human embryo, bundled in 3 interuterine sacs, represented by the 3 bands below the face, and a maize seed headband directly above the face. With the triple maize sprouts that emerge from the apex of the image, this combination of human embryo and maize symbols is an early example of the southern Mesoamerican metaphor, humans are maize, which originated, I think, in the Middle Formative after humans transformed tiny cobs of maize into larger ones, and it became a useful crop. The crown of the embryo's head takes the form of these deeply undulating lobes, similar to those in the portal motif in the Pecos River style. And interestingly, Dave Grove claims that the lobed head on the La Venta stela, this one, represents a mountain. The maize sprouts from this sign from mountain. That stela is one of 4 green schist stelae carved with the human embryo maize image that stood at the southern foot of the large earthen mound at La Venta, marking it as a mountain of sustenance or maybe a flower mountain. In any event, it's a physical place. It actually exists, but it also refers to a primordial mythical place. Just one more comparison. On the upper right is a Teotihuacan toponym for Flower Mountain. a mythic primordial location of abundance for deceased Teotihuacan warriors. The Flower Mountain toponym consistently possesses 3 peaks. These create lobes that are somewhat similar to the portal motif's arch shapes. Here, our Pecos River style portal is from Cedar Springs. Its exterior lobes are black on the left and white on the right. The so-called hole is decorated with stripes right up there. A double outline undulating form, this drapes within both sides of the arch, kind of like this, maybe. Within or behind this are faint lines that seem to flow from above the opening to the antlered anthropomorph figure below, who reaches toward hunting tools. The second Teotihuacan example, Star Mountain, shares with Cedar Springs portal an elongated undulating arch with interior jagged crenellations. So the purpose of these little comparisons is twofold: to consider the similar forms of the 2 toponyms and to show that toponymic signs may refer to both physical and mythical places, and places that are both physical and mythical. From this brief look, we find that middle formative and early classic Mesoamerican visual communication systems use similar ways of stylizing the concept of mountain, and that these bear some resemblance to the portal toponym in the Pecos River style, and further, that in all 3 cultures, the undulating arc mountain or portal seems to have referred to a primordial place of abundance. So, the Pecos River style pictographs gradually filled the grottos of the canyonlands between about 2000 BC and AD 600. It was probably a sacred destination for hunter-gathering groups of arid North America, and perhaps this liminal hinterland existed in the memories and traditions of various Mesoamerican groups for centuries. We have some tantalizing references from Nahua speakers that they had been searching for such a place. Nahua pictorial manuscripts and early colonial texts from central Mexico document several instances in which Nahuatl speakers journeyed from their place to other places in search of the primordial place, Chicomostoc, which means in Nahuatl, place of 7 caves. Today, let's explore 3 such trips. One was recorded in text and image in documents from Cuautinchan, Puebla, around 1545 AD, and concerns the battle for control of the powerful city of Cholula. Also from Cuautinchan is a pictorial mapa that portrays the journey. A third account was recorded alphabetically by Fray Diego Duran in his History of the Indies of New Spain, 1581, and it's sort of shocking to me. Suddenly we enter the realm of historical records. So this is the well-known portrayal of Chicomostoc from the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, a bound manuscript from Cuautinchan, Puebla, produced between 1545 and 63, according to Dana Liebson. The Chicomostoc image and the facing page from the Historia record in Nahuatl alphabetic texts and pictures a journey to Chicomostoc, taken between AD 900 and 1200, when the rule of the Tolteca Chichimeca in Cholula had been challenged by a confederation of small polities. Their patron deity advised them to seek out their ancestors, the great Chichimec warriors of Chicomostoc, to help them fight for their authority to rule. 2 Tolteca Chichimeca priests set out from Cholula for Chicomostoc. After arriving, they performed rituals and they made entreaties to the ancestral Chichimec who remained inside Chicomostoc. An interpreter emerged and negotiated with the Tolteca priests. Once the interpreter agreed to help, many Chichimecs grabbed their bows and arrows, and I've got that little image on the right with, you can see the bows and arrows. This is of interest because the recurved bow and arrow are found in the Lower Pecos somewhere between the same time frame, AD 900 and 1200, and apparently subsequently introduced to Mexico. These Chichimecs returned with the priests to Cholula, performing numerous preparatory rituals along the way, and eventually the Chichimeca from Chicomostoc helped the Tolteca vanquish their enemies. In this painting, the 7 caves surround a vaginal opening which is penetrated by the Toltec Quetzalteweyac's spear as he summons the Chichimecs within the cave. Red and orange paint outline the deeply lobed shapes of the 7 caves, and the interior of the womb-like shape is lined with smaller undulating bulges, which by this time signify internal tissue, in this case, the lining of the womb, according to Susan Milbrath. Within the lobes of the cave are multiple heads representing clans of Chichimecs, each named except for the lobe containing 4 women. Above the cave sign is the curled hill signifying Colhuatepec, place of those with ancestors. The dark color surrounding the cave is marked by the curlicue signs for stone, and as the underground transitions to the earth's surface, in here somewhere, plants are shown growing from rocks. These are thorny desert plants found in the Chihuahua Desert Biotic Zone, which extends into the lower Pecos. At the lower right corner of the image, a cave gives birth to a child, its water gushing forth. This specifies that Chicomostoc is a place of gushing, life-giving waters where humans emerged. Also surviving from the town of Cuautinchan, Puebla, is this amazing mapa drawn on native paper. The story depicted here parallels the one recorded in the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca. Their control of Cholula is threatened. The Tolteca Chichimeca send priests to summon the ancestral Chichimecs, known as powerful warriors from Chicomostoc, their place of origin. That journey takes only 5 days and is indicated by a simple line originating in Cholula. Here's Cholula. Well, I think I have a close-up in a minute. And here's the line of their journey. They like skip all the trouble and just head straight to Chicomostoc. Here's Cholula rotated so you could see the architecture of the city. And here's a detail of the image of Chicomostoc from the mapa. After much entreaty, the Chichimecs agree, and 8 tribes issue forth with bows and arrows. They're dressed as skins, as hunter-gatherers, in contrast to the civilized Tolteca, who dress in cloth. They make lots of ritual preparations, and they take a 20-day journey to return to Cholula, which is this whole left side of the map with its undulating bends is a record of their journey from Chicomostoc back to Cholula. After the successful battle and various rituals, the Tolteca grant the Chichimeca newcomers some land on which to build a town. Although we would tend to read this mapa from the upper left where Chicomostoc is, Elizabeth Boone and others have shown that the actual story begins in the center, in Cholula, and Chicomostoc remains on the periphery of the known world, a liminal place. In this map, because east is at the top, Chicomostoc appears in the northeast, and that's roughly where the lower Pecos Canyonlands are relative to central Mexico. We can compare these images of Chicomostoc to the most recent portal motif in Pecos River style, the one from White Shaman Cave, for which radiocarbon dates have provided a mean and standard deviation of 2,000 plus or minus 400 radiocarbon years before present, or about 400 BC to AD 400. In this late version of the lower Pecos toponym, the portal takes a more regular shape with 6 lobes on each side of a central vertical passageway, painted black with red and yellow outlines. The arch and lobes are painted with yellow and red bands and with black ovals within each lobe, much like the Chicomostoc image in the Historia. U-shaped signs adorn the black central passageway, which I have suggested refer like their Olmec counterparts to the womb. An antlered anthropomorph grasping ritual paraphernalia emerges from within the arch up at the top. If Nahua speakers traveled to the lower Pecos and saw some of the pictographic panels, they surely would have seen this motif as it is one of the most widely found. Meanwhile, in Tenochtitlan, the emperor was also thinking of Chico-Moztoc. 16th century friar Diego Duran recorded that in 1441, when Moctezuma I reigned as emperor, the origin place of the Mexica, Chico-Moztoc, was already lost. The emperor told his prime minister, Tlacaelel, that he wanted to send a party of warriors to seek out the place their ancestors had lived and to honor Coatlicue, the mother of Huitzilopochtli, their patron deity, whose name means hummingbird on the left or south. Tlacaelel replied that the mission should be staffed not by warriors, but by wizards who could use enchantments to discover the place. He said, "It is a great hill in the midst of lagoons filled with reeds and rushes, where the ancestors had lived for many years, cultivating crops and traveling in canoes. It will be covered by thorny bushes," he said, "and difficult to find." The wizards first went to Snake Mountain, where they transformed into animals for the rest of their journey. Arriving in Chico-Moztoc, they found an amazing abundance and variety of fish, plants, and animals. The ancient Earth Mother, Coatlicue, told them their rich foods and fancy lifestyle had shortened their lifespan, for here in Chico-Moztoc, where people hunted and gathered food, they did not grow old. So these accounts show that Chico-Moztoc was considered a faraway, hidden location. Although it was near water and had a great variety of life forms, it was a thorny desert. And I'd like to point out two things. First, Moctezuma I and rulers of Cuauhtinchan didn't send just anyone to Chico-Moztoc. We're limited, of course, by translations of these documents, but we understand that they sent priests or wizards, and that these people had to have the capacity to transform into animals. We could use the word shamanically. Now remember the very ancient peyote effigies that I showed you? Transformation or shifting consciousness seems to have been a regular element of life in the lower Pecos Canyonlands during the Archaic period, and probably influenced the kinds of imagery people made. Also, from the descriptions, we understand that Chico-Moztoc was a portal. The Chichimec ancestors were within, and rituals had to be performed to cause them to emerge. The Nahua even depicted Chico-Moztoc as a womb, specifying that the act of emergence was a birth or rebirth of ancestors into the Nahua space-time. Similarly, the Pecos River style portal toponym refers to the lower Pecos Canyonlands as a place of emergence or transformation, and suggests with its lobe shape mountains, rivers, and wombs. Now it's true that many people have proposed actual locations for Chico-Moztoc. Some have suggested it's in Florida, where Jim is. Others that it's a small town near Tula Hidalgo, and others that it is the site of La Quemada in Zacatecas. So I hesitate to suggest that the lower Pecos Canyonlands are the Chico-Moztoc, but I do think that the social memory of journeys over centuries to this hidden desert wonderland of obvious great antiquity could have been seared into the Nahua imagination. Now I'd like to share some ideas about the importance of place and how the human brain links shapes and places. I'm going to take a sip of water, though. The Nahua tied both dates and movements to places, not to space. This emphasis on movement as being from place to place is vividly shown in their cartographic histories, in which paths, sometimes populated, meander among toponyms or place signs. We can see this in the Mapa Siguenza, Movement and place are fundamental aspects of Aztec thought, according to philosopher James Maffei. He emphasizes that the Western concept of space as timeless, neutral, and abstract doesn't fit the Aztec concept, which is better understood as place. Here's a close-up of part of that mapa, a close-up of Aztlander. Place, Maffei writes, is an intricate web of interrelationships between humans, plants, animals, mountains, waters, and sun, all of which are animated and charged with power. Place situates things within a unique environment rather than within uniform space. That was a quote. So how did places and people choose each other? Working with 16th century documents and land titles, art historian Angel Julian Garcia Zambrano has studied the specific configurations of landscape in which the Nahua founded settlements. The most important geomorphological configuration was the cove, or rincon. This was a concave, water-filled basin surrounded by cliffs that were sliced through with ravines, in which ideally were caves or rock shelters. Where there was a confluence of waterways, the resulting serpentine undulations of the gushing rivers created the mental image of a generative womb. Although the rincon was hard to reach, one often the rincon was hard to reach. One often passed through a narrow ravine or riverbed to find it. Garcia writes, so whenever indigenous groups embarked on journeys to explore the land in search of a new place to live, they established themselves only in sites that bore specific geomorphological features, end quote. Garcia sees the choice of such a rincon as a meta-reference to the mythical Chicamostoc. Or was Chicamostoc mythical? Instead, maybe it was ancient and far away. Because, I'm saying that all the features of the rincon can be seen in the lower Pecos Canyonlands. Garcia writes that in creating place signs or toponyms, the Nahua constructed a mental image of a landscape in which mythic events occurred. I'm going to read that over. Garcia writes that in creating place signs or toponyms, the Nahua constructed a mental image of a landscape in which mythic events occurred. Prime among such events was when humans and or supernaturals emerged through a rincon. After emerging through the uterine watery canyons at Chicamostoc, humans began populating the earth through migration. This emergence and subsequent migration is documented, for example, in the Mixtec Selden roll, a 16th century painting on paper. The culture hero Nine Wind is dispatched from the celestial realm on the left by the creator couple. He dives past the Earth's surface, here's the Earth's surface, and he or a priest emerges from a cave in the underworld. He and others travel until they find the place they will settle, represented by a complex hill sign, and town foundation rituals begin. This is an example of a priest or culture hero emerging from a rincon, Chicamostoc, and subsequently founding towns, obviously. For the Nahua to choose a specific landscape form, the rincon, for establishing a settlement, they had to have had the concept, the visual memory, stored in the brain. How humans generate visual memory has been a research topic among neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists for the past several decades. From cognitive psychologists such as Andrew Hollingsworth, we learn that a familiar object or scene, such as a water-filled cove near a cliff, can form a context for remembering one or more complex objects, such as a rock shelter filled with paintings. The juxtaposition of the object, like a painted image, within a natural scene, such as a cove, easily lends itself to being stored within long-term visual memory. So I made up this slide. It's reasonable to propose that the impressive context of a cove or rincon in the lower Pecos region could help visitors remember a specific image they found there, such as a portal motif, especially if they saw that motif in several locations within the same context. Also, because they are already abstracted or reductive, people remember these kinds of simple linear pictures better than they remember actual places. From this, we can extrapolate then the image of the lower Pecos portal could remain in long-term memory for quite some time. This is a picture by my husband, Rick Dingus, of Rattlesnake Canyon, and I've put that yellow oval around where the pictographic panel is. It's possible that around 2200 BC, the people who created Pecos River style pictographs revered this landscape, populated by the remains of ancestors, as a place of generation of human origins. I've posed that they devised the portal motif as a toponymic sign that referred to the generative, undulating, womb-like canyons and waterways through which ancestors, plants, and animals emerged. I've also suggested that Mesoamericans of various eras had some knowledge, direct or indirect, of the lower Pecos Canyonlands and its pictographic record, and that their memories of the portal image influenced, if not the early toponyms of Monte Alban and Teotihuacan, the Nahua image of Chipamostoc. Between AD 600 and 1200, the semi-nomadic groups in Mexico's far north who encountered the lower Pecos may have created a mental representation of this rincon, this place of abundant life in many caves, as one of their places of origin, and retained in their memories and stories, and perhaps even in drawings, this meta-representation as they migrated southward into central Mexico. For decades, the late archaeologist Beatriz Braniff proposed that the U.S. Southwest and northern Mexico are part of the Gran Chichimeca, the territories of nomadic ethnic groups of the arid lands. In this region, people often inscribed petroglyphs in the places they passed through for ritual or economic purposes. This map is a 2006 reconstruction of trade routes through the Gran Chichimeca. Well, it's just from Mesoamerica to the American Southwest, which happens to pass through the Gran Chichimeca. There is tentative evidence now for a route that intersects the lower Pecos. These maps show that either Nahua were traveling through the region or in communication with those who did. This is even iffier. This is one reconstruction of the distribution of Uto-Aztecan languages in pre-Columbian times. As I've said, no one knows what languages the archaic hunter-gatherers who moved into the Canyonlands spoke. Linguists know there were many other languages spoken in the greater Rio Grande area, but it seems pretty clear that Uto-Aztecan speakers at some point would or should have moved through the lower Pecos. And evidence has been mounting that the peoples of the American Southwest interacted with Mesoamerican-related groups. Archaeologist Stephen Lexon, for example, who spoke to this group recently, considers the hierarchical settlement pattern of Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico to relate to the Nahua Altepet. Art historian James Farmer suggests that the use of Mesoamerican symbols like feathered serpents and goggle eyes in rock art traditions in the Southwest, American Southwest, points to a conscious choice to participate in a greater Mesoamerican interaction sphere, and that this began at a very early period. Also, when we think of what leads people from place to place, we should not forget the pathways created by plants and animals, such as peyote, which draws the Huichol into the arid north. Here, the Huichol homeland is in green. The range of peyote in archaic times is shown in gray, and this yellow arrow represents the annual pilgrimage of the Huichol people into the peyote-rich area. So there's peyote that has done this traveling, and monarch butterfly passes pretty close or over the lower Pecos region in its annual migration, as does the ruby-throated hummingbird. You have to think of Huitzilopochtli. Even people walking along the trade routes running west of the Sierra Madre might follow these valiant creatures to the Rincon of the lower Pecos, a place of human origin. Finally, I brought up the power that landscapes forms, the shapes of place, have in human consciousness. Ancient Mesoamericans always chose special places in which to found their settlements. Whether it was the twin peaks of Chalcatzingo with the stunning view of Popocatépetl, or the big Oxbow River that wraps around the hills of Yaxchilan, each place was special. For the Nahua, the cove, the rincon, reminded them of a place their ancestors had survived for millennia, Chicamostoc, a place of rebirth amid rock shelters and uterine canyons. Whether it was a real place or a mythical one, it was unforgettable in its power. And that's the end. But just for kicks, I want to show you one thing. This is a beard. And I guess you can see me. Can you guys see me? Oh, I have to stop sharing. Okay, stop sharing. Okay. Now can you see me?
There you go.
Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this is a beer. Bend, Oregon, where I live, is a town of 20-some breweries, among which is the Deschutes Brewery. And the Deschutes Brewery has as its logo the mountains. We're right next to the Cascade volcanoes and the river. So it's a toponym. We have toponyms, even here in Bend. We have toponyms for breweries and beer in the city and stuff. I mean, the shape of place, I think, really affects people. So that's it for me.
Well, that was really good, Carolyn. And before the Q&A and before anybody might step out, I wanted to announce next month's program. And if I can get it over here. So back a few months when we had the talk by Nathan Nakasuka about the human genomes, and he was able to bring the Clovis culture all the way down into South America. Anyway, during the Q&A, there was a man who spoke for, people were chatting with me like, why are you letting this guy talk so long? But his name is David Patzin Young. And in correspondence with him, I invited him to give his own Zoom and present his, he's Apache, and he's part of like a new religious movement there in the Southwest with the tribes. And it has a connection again to Mesoamerica. So his program is Mexicayolo, the philosophy, beliefs, and teachings of a North American indigenous religious movement. So you all can tune in on October 13th for that. And then we do have a few questions here. James Jacobs says, are you familiar with the Grand Gallery, Grand Canyon, so-called Shaman Gallery? It resembles the Pecos more so than does Barrier Canyon style in his view.
Yeah, but isn't that later? And isn't that later, Jim?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. I think it might be older than Barrier Canyon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, it is.
I have some photos. You can find some online. I did a very careful photo study, but I don't publish that site because I don't want people going there.
Yeah.
It's pretty special and it's very difficult to get to.
Well, my husband photographed a lot of rock art, and I bet he will illuminate me. But haven't I seen it published somewhere?
Yeah, it's published, and
yeah.
no doubt you can Google search it, and as much as I object to interpretation, use, and naming in archaeology, you'll have better luck searching Shaman's Gallery than any other name.
Okay.
All right. And
That out.
Alan Dart from the Old Pueblo Archaeological Society, he had to leave just recently. He asked for the recording link, but he just wants me to remind you privately that by going to Google Images and searching for Coahuila topographic map, you can find several topographic, physiographic maps of Coahuila.
Yeah, you can find Coahuila and you can find Texas, but it's hard to find Coahuila and Texas together unless you can get a good satellite image.
All righty. But he did leave a question here. He said the Pecos River style Porter motifs, arc meander shape, and the Olmec La Venta Stela 2526 image are similar to the tablita headdresses used by many of the U.S. Southwest Pueblo peoples in group rituals, except that the Pueblo headdresses usually feature stepped rather than meandering outlines. And he's heard that the tablitas symbolize mountains or clouds or both of which are associated with rain.
Yeah, it's not exactly a question. It's just a good observation that this sort of, stepped or lobed symbol is pretty widely thought to represent mountains. And, mountains and rain are usually associated.
And Soaring Bear is wondering, do you have anything more to say about the potential role of peyote and transformations and ceremonies?
Well, Carolyn Boyd has published, the Shumla archaeologist, has published a good bit on peyote and has done a lot of research. So, I refer you to her. All I know really is that peyote is indigenous to the Lower Pecos. It was found in those really archaic, really ancient contexts, 6,000 BC, and that Carolyn Boyd also thinks that some of the particular dots, particularly specific dots that appear, black dots that appear on the tines, on the horns of deer within the pictographs, are probably related to peyote. And her White Shaman book goes into a great deal of detail about the use of peyote among the Huichol and in its possible relationship to the Lower Pecos. She's recently traveled to the Huichol area to interview people, and they get really excited when they see these pictures of the Lower Pecos pictographs. I'm not. They seem to they seem to think that all these images are familiar. And she, in her White Shaman book, interpreted the White Shaman panel. You only saw it in its entirety from a distance, and I guess in those separated out color images that she did, the white, the black, red, yellow, and white. She thinks there's a pretty much one-to-one relationship between Huichol myth and the White Shaman panel. That makes me uncomfortable. So I can't tell you much more about the use of peyote in transformations and ceremonies, except for, it's a transformative experience to do peyote, and I'm sure that people did it. We know they did it in the Lower Pecos, and I'm pretty sure that that's reflected in the pictographs. So I'm sorry I can't illuminate you too much more.
I did have a little personal experience back in the 70s, but
yeah, but we're not talking about that, are we, Jim?
I don't think so. But I mean, it was nothing. I guess I didn't take enough. It was nothing major. I didn't see the little guy you're supposed to that appears. But Rob makes a comment. The U-shapes on the crenellated arch from the white shaman panel are intriguing and remind me of the U-shaped symbols that also appear on San Bartolo murals, which I believe is a pre-classic marker for shiny and brilliance. You mentioned the Olmec U symbol, and I know I've seen it on stela carved at Izapa, but are there any more U-shapes seen elsewhere in the rock art?
That's a good question. As I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert in Lower Pecos rock art. I'm just trying to make this link. But relative to San Bartolo, I know that that's what David Stewart and Carl Talbot say, and it's probably right to some extent. I'll admit that. But I also think that in my Olmec book, I talk about the U-shape at great length. And I think it's very clear for the formative period, for the middle formative period, that it does represent a womb because there's a U-shaped platform at La Venta, and on it were 3 colossal sandstone fetuses, each, over 8 feet high. So if you have 3 fetuses on a U-shape, I mean, it's pretty logical to relate that to a womb. And that scene at San Bartolo is the scene in which the 4, or was it 5, humans pop out of that gourd. They're born. The gourd is marked with that U shape. So, I mean, I don't see how Carl and David can really argue that it's not a womb. It's not symbolic of a womb. It may also be shiny and brilliant. And I know that later in Maya iconography, it tends to mark shiny, brilliant things. But I still think there's a connection that concept of shiny and brilliant somehow has to do with maybe the slick liquids of the womb or something like that, that it has something to do with birth as well.
All right.
Even at Izapa, in those sky bands and in those earth bands, there's the celestial bird appearing in some cases. And we have the phrase from the Popol Vuh at the very, very beginning of the Popol Vuh, all was still and quiet in the bowl of in the womb of the sky and the womb of the earth. So we know that for the post-classic Maya, there was a womb in the sky as well as a womb in the earth. So I'm not giving up on my U-shape as womb.
All right. Well, thank you. I don't see any more questions. Does anybody want to unmute and ask a question?
I just want to make a comment, if that's possible.
Go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to tell Carolyn that I really appreciated and enjoyed studying her book on Yaxchilan.
Why, thank you. It's way out of date. And if any expert epigraphers out there would like to, republish that book, it would be awesome.
I can't imagine how much time you spent on that because it's so loaded with so much good information.
Hey, Michael, it was just 9 years.
So what? But I still have the book and I still go through it occasionally.
Yeah, it still sells little trickles of sales through UT Press. So I appreciate that, everyone. I get a penny every time somebody buys one.
Okay, great. Thank you for your show tonight.
Sure thing.
Can I add a comment?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you see my camera?
Yeah, your Huichol peyote painting and the deer.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that it would be a good focus, the Huichol art in relationship to Pecos.
Well, like I said, Carolyn Boyd, in her book on White Shaman, extensively researches Huichol mythology and contemporary practices, and she's doing that.
Yeah. Right. And another aspect of this is linguistics. So, what origin, cave, reproductive parts, these things could have some significant overlap where they're metaphors. One thing is a metaphor for another. And then when a metaphor enters language, depicting the original source word could represent how the term is applied. So a cave is a representation of perhaps a uterus.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. I am not an expert in Nahuatl. I'm not an expert in any of this, really. I just kind of stumbled into this as Jim said at the beginning, because it just so happened that my university owned Rattlesnake Canyon and was being a very poor steward of the site, and in fact, it's about to be scoured out by grit from floods and stuff, and it's really a shame. So I kind of got involved in trying to help them be better stewards, etc. So I'm just kind of throwing this out as an idea. I don't feel like I've proven anything. It's just like food for thought. That's kind of where I am right now. But I did want to do it because I think it's important for people to know that this body of pictographs exists. And most people are totally unfamiliar with it.
Yeah.
Even the Mesoamericanists,
Really
and even people of the Southwest. Pardon?
It's really remarkable. People should go there, as difficult as it is. If you're a serious student of American prehistory, this is a must-see place.
Yeah.
One last thought, place marks. People are building monuments all the time, marking place, and my research focuses on a possible systematic of American place marks, the major monuments. And searching for a place of origin might be possible when you consider that there's a first mountain, there's a first monument, other places are built in relation to the first place, etc. Just a thought.
Yeah. There is sort of there is a tantalizing half shred of evidence about that links the Lower Pecos to Nahuatl speakers. Some archaeologists found a little bit of human remains they were able to do some DNA studies. And Jennifer Raff, who's recently published quite a well-considered book on DNA evidence about peopling of the Americas, published an abstract that this sample of DNA that was found in one of the archaeological contexts in the Lower Pecos seemed to be most closely linked to Nahuatl groups. But she never published it as a real paper after that abstract. So I don't know whether that was reconsidered or overturned or what happened. But everybody keeps hoping that someone will find some DNA, that will somehow show at least somebody who came to the Lower Pecos, or even some artifacts. Even though it's a hidden and liminal place, people have been going there and kind of sifting through the caves and taking stuff away. They're not guarded for the most part, and people will sneak onto private land and just take stuff. So it's, surface collection is a real problem. And so we still don't have a smoking gun as to who these people were or what language they spoke.
Can you believe we just had one person enter? They're more than, hour and a half late.
They probably got the time mixed up. Well, thank you, everybody, so much, and appreciate your questions. And it's good to see a lot of you.
All right. And thank you, Carolyn. And thank you for, after hearing what you've been going through lately, thank you for not canceling and showing up for everybody. That's a true trooper. I thank you.
I just broke my leg Friday.
Oh boy, I wasn't going to say what, but
Oh yeah, life is crazy.
Wow, that's something. All right, well, I hope it heals up real soon.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for viewing this Aztlander program recording. And please subscribe to this Aztlander YouTube channel to receive free monthly issues of the Aztlander Magazine of the Americas. Contact your host, Jim Reed, at mayaman@bellsouth.net. Take care and see you again soon.